Lawsome by ConsultWebs. Breakthrough insights to build a thriving law firm with your host, Tanner Jones.
Hello, all you Lawsome listeners. Welcome to the show. Today on the show, we have Nathan Miller. Nathan is the founder and CEO of Miller Inc. He's a communication strategist sought out by executives at the highest levels of business, government, and the nonprofit world. He's helped hundreds of organizations better tell their stories and navigate complex global issues and crises. Before founding Miller Inc. in 2013, Nathan was the Director of Speechwriting for Israel's permanent mission to the United Nations, serving as Senior Communications Advisor and the Chief Speechwriter for Israeli Ambassador Ron Prosor. Nathan also served as a Policy Director of the Homeland Security Advisory Council and as a Goldman Fellow at the Transatlantic Institute, a think tank of Brussels, Belgium. Nathan has been recognized by Israeli newspaper Mariv as one of the 10 young Jews who will change the world, and by OC Metro as one of Southern California's 40 most inspiring entrepreneurs under 40. Today's topic is crisis communications, mastering the art of effective messaging. So welcome, Nathan. Thanks for joining the show today.
Thanks so much, Tanner. It's so great to be here.
Very glad to have you here. This is such an important topic and one that really we don't talk about too often. It's almost as if we wait around for a crisis to happen and then we scramble to figure out what's next. And obviously having a strategy in place is critical. So I want to cover this topic in a number of different ways. But as we get started here, I'll speak to how effective communication is clearly pivotal in virtually any industry, any business, and especially any law firm across the country. And you, as a seasoned communication strategist with clearly lots of years of experience in helping businesses and organizations navigate some of these very complex issues and crises, how about you take a few moments here in getting started by sharing some of the more core components of an impactful and efficient message, especially from maybe the legal perspective?
That's great. Well, first of all, Tanner, it's really great to be here. I'm excited to talk about all things crisis communications as they intersect with the legal community. We spend so much of our time working with attorneys. I'm actually married to an attorney, and during my tenure at the UN, we had a close working relationship with the legal department, so much so that it was sort of a running joke when I was there. And since I founded Miller Inc. 10 years ago, probably our number one business referrer is lawyers, and we work on all aspects of legal communication. So this is something we spend a lot of time thinking about. In regards to your question, I try to make things really simple for our team and for our clients. So every new associate who starts at our firm, we go over three core components to an effective message, and we've actually broken it down to the 3 C's. So the 3 C's are clear, concise, and compelling. And the 3 C's live in tension with each other. But let me go through, to make something really clear, it's often hard to make something clear and concise and compelling all in one message. But that's the art of crafting a really great message. So,
Sure.
So you want something clear, meaning your intended listener can understand exactly what you're saying. It's free from jargon. It's free from ambiguity. And it's something that they can really grasp exactly what you're saying. And that's a huge challenge with so many messages we see, especially when you're trying to translate a legal concept, to a broader audience. Concise. We're in a culture of decreasing attention spans. People don't have the patience to read through much, and what you think is really important often is not as important for your intended audience. So we really push our clients and our team here to think about how do you make that message as short and concise as possible. You want it to be just as long as it needs to be in order to be clear, but as short as possible so that the most salient concepts bubble to the top. And then compelling. You want it to fly off the page. There's different formulations for thinking about how do you create a compelling message. My personal favorite is something created a few thousand years ago by Aristotle around ethos, pathos, logos. Ethos meaning establishing the credibility of the speaker. Pathos, what is that emotional punch in the message? How is it touching people emotionally? And logos, how does it touch their brain, and how does it help them understand the logical flow? But people are emotional, complex creatures, and you need to really establish all three of those to have a compelling message. And then we have a corollary to the three C's. If I have a sec, if I can expound a little more,
Please.
the three S's. And when we're thinking about a compelling message, there's some different tools in your toolkit. So we have the three S's are stories, statistics, and sound bites. Humans, like I said, are, we're emotional creatures, and we're hardwired to connect to other human stories. So whenever we're thinking about how do we make something interesting, we if we can put it into the format of a story that someone can relate to, and in their own life or through their own family or through their own organization, it's always more effective. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we weed out those really compelling stories. Statistics can be wonderful tools for explaining. They can also be incredibly boring. So when we think about statistics, we want to put them into a context that, again, is a human context that people can understand. So, instead of saying this technology will reduce your plant's carbon footprint by 40%, which people is sort of amorphous, again, unclear. You want to make it, really specific and clear. So you'd say this technology will, for your plant, have the equivalent of taking 100,000 cars off the road, whatever it is. Make it really specific and clear, and then sound bites. I spent a lot of time as a political speechwriter over my career in different contexts, at the UN, in politics here in the U.S., and also some time in Europe. And every great speech, at the heart of it, and every great communication is a core soundbite that captures the thesis of what you're trying to say, but doesn't just explain, but puts it into a package that's really memorable, that people can grasp, and that they're going to repeat after the speech. Most of the time, you hear a speech, you can only remember one or two lines, and that's true with any quote or anything else. So when we're thinking about crafting a quote for attribution for a client in a press release or in a media story, or we're thinking about an op-ed piece, or we're thinking about anything, even a legal brief that we know is going to be covered by the media, we're always thinking about what is that core soundbite that captures the essence of something, and embedded in that soundbite is something that's memorable, whether it's humor, whether it's rhyme, whether it's alliteration, whether it's a great metaphor, whatever that soundbite is that people are really going to take away and bring with them, and carry with them after they hear your communication.
Yeah, it's so formulaic and intentional. It's fascinating to me. But you alluded to our attention spans today. Obviously, the digital age we're living in, there, even with social media, it's like the shorter the content, often the easier it is to go viral, the easier it is to share and increase engagement. And so, how is this ultimately influencing, the art of messaging today for legal entities?
So it's funny. I'm in the middle of writing a piece right now that will probably play soon, where I actually think messaging is going to become increasingly important. So on the one hand, people are being conditioned to not want to read or to engage, but at the same time, there is more and more and more opportunity for you as your own entity to reach directly to an audience. Everybody is a publisher today. The mediated model of engagement, where you had to go through a gatekeeper, whether that was a reporter, or some other kind of broadcaster that would reach directly to an audience, has disappeared. And you have the ability to reach directly to an audience, and so that means you have to take the time to put the message into a form that audience can consume, can understand, and is going to want to share. And the other thing I'll say is just with AI, the rise of AI, a lot of the more formulaic writing, which is what most writing is today. Most press releases are boring and generic, and boilerplate. Computers are going to be able to write those boilerplate press releases now. So the people who are going to really have the advantage in this evolving environment are those who can develop a really, really compelling message with that unique human touch, with that unique understanding that we have as human beings, and what's going to be able to spark something in another human being that's going to make them not just hear me, but really be able to listen. And so that is an art that is going to take increasing importance as maybe 70, 80, 90% of the content that's now created will be created by machines, and in the not so distant future. So it's those people who have that kind of ancient skill of developing a powerful message are going to be the kingmakers, I believe, in this new reality, because everybody else will have access to the AI tools to just sort of create the generic message.
That's right. Yeah, the cream will rise to the top, and
Yeah.
it comes with, it's the messaging. I love that. It illustrates how important it is to be truly refining your own craft in messaging as a lawyer. So what about crisis communication? I mean, let's step back a little bit here. What exactly is crisis communication to the everyday law firm? Why is it so important for firms to have a well-defined strategy in place in the event of a crisis?
Crisis communications is any issue, matter, situation where there is potential adverse reputational damage for the law firm itself or for the client that they're working on behalf, I would say. And lawyers are in the business often of being at the center of conflict. So they are, almost every lawyer has the potential for crisis communications needs. I think it's very, very important. You said this at the beginning of the podcast, and I just want to underscore it now. If you're thinking about crisis communications for the first time when a situation arises, which is, to be fair, most people, you're way too late. You're way too late. And it's the challenge I see over and over and over again. And there's a lot of basic things that you should be doing as attorneys to be prepared in the event that you have a crisis communications needs. And we can talk through what those things are. But I would just say, number one, the most important thing is that you're thinking about this before you have the need, so that you're in place. Because if you're making if you're trying to organize your crisis communications capability and response, as the crisis is unfolding, I liken it to, making the most important decision of your life, driving down the freeway at 100 miles an hour, smoking a cigar and weaving in and out of traffic. That's if you were sort of put on the spot to make that decision at that moment, is that how you would want to be making really important, complex, multifaceted decisions?
Right. You're not in the mental state in that moment. And that's why, just hearing earlier you having a formula, oftentimes in those events, it's you have to go back and lean on what's been in place, an established strategy that everyone's aware of. Otherwise, you immediately create chaos within the firm. So yes, you alluded to this, but let's jump into some of these fundamental elements of what you've seen an effective crisis communication plan being.
First of all, every law firm itself should have a crisis communications plan. What is that plan outline, and what are some of the key elements of that we do for every client? One is identifying what the decision making. First of all, laying out what are the different potential crisis scenarios that you could have as a firm, or you can do this on behalf of. And I think I would recommend, if you have any client where there's potential reputational issues, or there's even an inkling this could happen, it's a good idea to put a plan in place for them when you take them on. Scenarios could be, you get adverse with a client, or you have a client where something emerges, for the client that could be challenging for the firm from a reputational perspective, or documents that shouldn't have been leaked or somehow leaked, or, I mean, there's so many different scenarios, and it depends on the nature of the firm and the book of business, but we game out all the potential crisis communication scenarios when we think about a crisis plan. Then we build a decision-making process. So we look at what are the scenarios that could happen, what would be the actions that we would have to take, and who would be the key decision makers to make the decisions as to when we would trigger certain actions. Part of the problem often is, especially in big firms with lots of different partners, people don't know who's going to make the decision, how will they decide, when will they decide, how does this get triggered. So if you build and establish that process ahead of time, when it happens, you're not negotiating on the process. You have a process in place. You want to identify who would be key spokespeople for the firm or for the client, right? If there's a client situation, you want to know who's going to be able to speak on behalf of the client. Is it the lawyer? Do you bring in an outside spokesperson to deal with some of the media issues because of, and there's a lot of reasons why you might want to do that. I always, by the way, just as an aside, I always recommend on an issue with heavy media, not to just let the lawyers handle it, which is what clients will sometimes say. An outside PR person has a lot more flexibility with reporters, and Tanner, we can get into why that's often a good idea. But you want to identify sort of ahead of time who's going to be speaking to press, both on record and on background. Who's going to be facilitating the engagement with the media on more of a, just sort of a tactical level whose email address will they have, all those kinds of things. You may even want to have some boilerplate statements drafted ahead of time for situations, so sort of the framework in which you're going to be communicating and what are some of the high level things that you want to say. So you have that really in place. Another key element of any crisis communications plan is training. You want to train any staff that is going to be potentially speaking with media should be media trained, so they understand what's the appropriate way to engage with a reporter. How do you conduct an interview? Those kinds of things. And then you also want to train all your frontline staff. Anybody who answers the phone or receives an email at your organization should understand how to handle a media inquiry or an inquiry from the public. This is often where things fall apart, and I see this again and again and again. And I just drill it into every client that we have, and on every interview that I do, I see this as a chink in everybody's armor. So train your frontline staff. And what does that mean? You should have a simple media policy, and the media policy should probably be do not talk to reporters. If you get a media inquiry, please forward it to the following person. Often we'll create a dedicated email address for the client, an internal email address that will get forwarded to anybody who's involved in the media response. It'll be inquiries@clientemail.com. We ask, and then we have a training for everybody on the frontline staff where we go through. We've created this email address. This is the appropriate procedure if a reporter calls, and we go through all the different ways that reporters try to get people to talk, or people from the public try to extract information. And anyone on your frontline staff has to be really well trained. And this is true for a law firm beyond just reporters, but anybody from the public. It might be opposing counsel. There might be an investigator for someone on the other side. People are trained to try to, they understand that this could be a point of weakness for an organization. So you have to train anybody who's going to answer the phone on how they respond and how they don't give out information. They only take in information, and then they translate that information immediately. So they send that email out, or they make that phone call as soon as they receive it, so that if there's a inquiry, you can respond in real time. You want to put that policy into your employee handbook, both yours as a law firm and any client that you're working with, and you want to train on it for any new hire that comes in, and train on an annual basis, so there's a refresher. I think if you do that, you cut out probably 20-30% of the mistakes that I see again and again. So often they revolve around this frontline person. Those are some very high level tips. Obviously, there's a lot of other things that you want to think about, but it's really important to have these conversations when you take on the matter. And let me just say one other word, which is there's sometimes an inkling with lawyers to not share with the PR people anything about the case until after it's been published. And let me just say it would be an exaggeration to say that this is challenging for the PR firm. It's really, really hard. If you're finding out about a matter after it's already been filed and there's already media on it, you've lost every advantage and every opportunity. So to the extent that you can retain a PR firm through the law firm, and it's complicated whether this is privileged communication, but whatever you're able to share within the confines of the legal strategy with the PR firm ahead of time, and give them a heads up, it makes a huge difference for the client. So if you can prepare, that's a huge comparative advantage. And similarly, if you believe that you're going to be sued, or you believe that there's going to be a legal action or anything, to hold that information and not bring in the communications folks, it's a problem. There was I spent some years in working in international diplomacy, and there's a famous line from someone who was a longtime spokesperson at the State Department who said, it's often practice to only bring in the communications team for the crash landings, but you also want to bring them in for takeoff as well. That it's really important that they're a partner and kept appraised throughout the process, so they're not just coming in to try to clean up a mess. The odds are, if you're brought in only at the end, your ability to do a really good job in mitigating the situation, or driving towards a better outcome, is going to be greatly reduced.
You drive home such an important point there, which is what we're talking about. I mean, being proactive with this ultimately also means being proactive with your communications team and being ahead of it as opposed to behind it. And you've given several practical tips, many of which I think most of our listeners probably haven't even considered, especially even on the the intake side, and making sure those on the front-facing client side are well versed in this. That's fascinating to me. Well, so, I'd like to take another slight different direction here because a lot of law firms, a lot of listeners here have likely leaned on outside help, marketing agencies, for example, public relations, different groups to be able to help them specifically with what we're talking about, their messaging strategy. Naturally, the legal sector is a very unique one. There are certain things you can and cannot say, as we've already spoken about. But how do you think marketing agencies help law firms tailor their messages for a wider audience? What have you seen from that standpoint?
Tanner, I am married to an attorney, so and like I said, I spent most of my career engaged in dialogue with attorneys, and the philosophy of legal writing is very different than the philosophy of writing when it comes to the work that we do as a public relations agency or a strategic communications agency, or my work in, in politics. We have different goals, and so there are some lawyers who are really great at taking off their legal hat and putting on a marketing hat, or putting on a politics hat, or putting on a communications hat. There are many that I've met who are excellent at that. Even some of the best at that of folks that I've met. But that's not the median lawyer attorney, and so I think it's extremely important that you find a communications partner, a marketing partner who you trust, who you don't just see as someone as you know, a tactical tool to execute your end, but you need to give them all the inputs and direction. You want someone with a point of view who understands this. And I assure you that people like that exist in our field. Part of the problems with the marketing field, I think in general, as well, there's degrees that you can get and things like that. It's a less quote unquote credentialed field than your typical white collar lawyer, which draws people who have, there's sort of a credentialing that takes place, and lawyers understand how they all fit it within a broader pecking order, and it's harder in comms. I would say there's a wider disparity in terms of talent and abilities when it comes to my field. Um, and but that being said, there are really great people who understand how to speak directly to an audience, and you just have to take the time to find them and trust them. And and if you don't think that they're understanding your target audience, or understanding your objectives, or can't really speak your language in a way that feels resonates with you, you should find a different person to work with you. Um, that's my number one piece of advice, is find an expert and trust that expert and empower that expert to do a good job for you. Um, I so often see lawyers very hesitant to trust communications folks, or to feel like they have to do their job for them because they're, I don't know, to say it really crassly, because they're smarter than them. Um, uh, and it may be that they are, or it may be that they just don't have the right person in place to do the work. So that's piece of advice number one. Um, the other thing I'll say is, one of our it's sort of a glib uh, tagline that we have around the office, which is PR is dead, meaning that the communications environment is totally unrecognizable from when I started almost 20 years ago. That things are moving so quickly, the decline of traditional journalism, the rise of everybody becoming a publisher, the increasing power that you have as an advertiser to slice and dice audiences and reach directly to your target audience in a very specific way. Um, so many, the AI, there's some technologies, so many other changes, that you need somebody who is living and breathing in that environment every single day and understands it. What I see with many clients, including many attorneys who've hired marketing firms, is they're doing legacy strategies with legacy agencies that aren't really achieving the results that they want. That might have been really great strategies in 1994, but today they don't make sense. And I would say there's no one way to be successful in this environment. Sort of like truisms like print is dead, or you need to be on social media, or anyone who gives you sort of like a maxim of things that you should always do is probably not creative or specific enough for you. You want someone who's going to tailor a strategy to reach your audience in your market with your message, with the right spokesperson who's going to have the credibility that you bring to the table. And that's really hard and tailored and specific and work. You don't want, in general, I think, there's a lot of I describe them as sort of commodity shops, right? They're just doing generic strategies that sort of kind of work for a lot of people. You generally want a specialty shop that really understands your specific market and your needs, because what I find so often is going across different verticals that we work in. And we have I have a strategic communications agency outside of our crisis practice that works with technology companies and publicly traded companies and different folks in a few different verticals. What I find is that every vertical we work in is very different. It's a different media environment. It requires a different set of technological tools, often different sense of thoughtfulness around messaging, and more than ever, one size does not fit all. And so you really need somebody who's tailored to that specific approach. Not just someone who has done legal marketing before, but somebody who's done legal marketing successfully within your area of practice, within your geographic region. All of those things are really, really important.
I couldn't agree more, Nathan. I think that's the beauty of specialization, what the web has created for marketers and law firms alike. But what you're suggesting is solid advice for any law firm that's looking to better collaborate with a marketing agency. I'd like to ask this question maybe from a slightly different angle here, pointed more toward the marketing agency themselves. How would you answer this question? How can marketing agencies better assist their clients, their law
Yeah.
firms, with respect to better crafting their messaging, bigger impacts, more clarity, and more consistency in the messaging? What tips would you provide those marketing agencies?
I'll tell you, just for us as a firm, I say any set of services that we provide, I want to believe that we have the ability to be the best in the world at delivering that service. That's our rubric for thinking about when do we take on a matter and when we don't. There's a lot of business that I don't take on because I don't think it's the right fit for our skill set as a firm or our experience as a firm. So I really believe in specialization. If you want to be a great legal marketing agency, figure out how you can even subspecialize within that area to be the best legal marketing agency for IP lawyers in the Asheville, broader region, or whatever it is that you might, or in, New York City, or I think you want to have some subject matter expertise so you can be a partner, a thought partner at the table. Too many marketing agencies just see themselves as a blunt tactical tool. And people don't want to pay the big bucks for a blunt tactical tool because you're a commodity, because you're a dime a dozen and everybody else, they can go and with like I said, with the rise of AI and, we've seen in the marketing industry in the last couple of years, people who are generic digital marketers have just become so, everybody's done it. And those skill sets and those offerings as agencies are increasingly being, I think, taken over by AI, and that'll happen in the next few years. So the more that you can have a really specific point of view where you can be a partner at the table and speak to lawyers or to whoever, and not be afraid to really assert a point of view, provide strategic value, I think that's the best way to have an effective agency. Otherwise, it's a race to the bottom, and you're not just competing against other agencies in your state or across the U.S. You're competing against other agencies around the world for that kind of commodity type work, and I think it's a very challenging way to sustain an agency and make a living.
I would agree with that, and that's what I've seen in my experience as well. And I think that's to the better. It's for the better for the industry itself. It's ultimately going to allow law firms to experience a better brand, better representation of their brand and messaging. As we end here, Nathan, I'll say this has been a really enjoyable conversation for me, and I have my own takeaways. But we always try to end with some good actionable steps for listeners. And while you've given a lot of tips, I'd like to allow you some time as we close here to offer any other key actionable steps you would recommend for lawyers in particular to refine their messaging skills. Any tips or suggestions you would offer them?
Well, I want to say a couple things about messaging. Then maybe there's a couple other tactical things that I didn't mention before that I want to come back to because I think they're just important. For refining your messaging skills, I think you need to, there's another strategist in our space who said it's not what you say, it's what they hear. It's putting yourself, the people who are the strongest, who are the strongest at developing messaging, right, have this amazing ability to inhabit the mind of their target audience. You've got to tailor the suit for whoever you're trying to speak to. You've got to be able to close your eyes and think about what do they like, what do they dislike, what are their perceptions, what are their misperceptions, what is this buzzword going to trigger for them, and really understand. And if you're not sure who your target audience is, then there's no way that you can have an effective message for them. And if you don't know who it is, you better spend some time getting clarity on the front end, and then really try to inhabit their mind. And also, I would just say creating great messaging takes time. The first thing that you think of probably isn't the right message. Take the time to hone it with a team. When in our firm, we create something called a messaging architecture for every client, every new engagement, which is a 2 or 3 page document of 3 or 4 key value propositions that we want to communicate. And maybe every message won't have all the value propositions, but comprehensively it captures all of the information that we want to deliver as part of the campaign, and it frames it in a specific way for the target audience that we're thinking about. And that takes a lot of time to develop that messaging architecture. We work as a group of 3 or 4 people for every client, that at the front end of the engagement to really refine down what is that messaging architecture, what does it look like, how do we speak to folks. So I would say you need to give yourself the time to do it, and then, like I said earlier, 3 C's, 3 S's: clear, concise, compelling stories, statistics, and sound bites. Those are some of the formulations we think about. I'll just say on some other tactical tips, something I didn't mention, which is really important, is digital security. People are not taking their cybersecurity serious enough, in my experience, and law firms are not in particular. You need to have a really, really great digital security person. I've seen so many crises created because the law firms or their clients were not prepared and had hack and leaks and those types of things. So you have to look at every part of your organization, whether you're a small firm or a giant firm, and think about who could potentially compromise this, especially if you have more sensitive clients. And even if you don't have clients that you think are necessarily more sensitive, the world is crazy, and it's very, very cheap for people to hack others, and you just, and the lawyers are often at the front line of that. So you got to be, I would be very, very thoughtful about that as a specific tactical tip. And then the last thing is just thinking about, actually 2 more. Thinking about your online reputation is really important, and there are tools at your disposal to think about what, how you rank on Google, and when you put out a comment, that's going to live on the internet forever. So making sure that everything that you share as an attorney is also something that you want living on the internet, reflecting on you and not just the client. I think it's really, really important to remember that this is a ever evolving field. You've got to always look at where the trends are moving in communications, and you got to find the right people who are thinking about how things are evolving. And the right question is to always ask folks, if people have been doing the same thing for 20 or 30 years, it probably means they're not the right firm for you. You want to understand how people are changing and evolving and how they're staying at the cutting edge of this field, because I know that if we're not always changing, we're gonna be in big trouble, and someone else can eat our lunch as an agency.
No doubt about that, Nathan. And I love the a couple points that you added at the end. I mean, particularly the cybersecurity. That's something that I actually just read on LinkedIn right before this podcast, where a lawyer had been hacked. He didn't know it. Had apparently been hacked for months. Mm-hmm. And at the time when he was getting ready to disperse payment to a client, there was someone stepped in an attempt to try to pull that money through a wire. And actually communicating. And it opened my eyes up, but just hearing and what you're suggesting, hopefully our listeners are taking note, because a lot of times that proactive effort you're mentioning in terms of think through what are the potential crises that could occur within our firm. A lot of firms tend to they want to avoid that. They don't even want to entertain that thought, but just walking through that process, what if our email got hacked? Just asking yourself that question will force thinking through how you're going to handle that situation, and will very likely also draw out new processes and systems in an effort to be more proactive and protect the future of your law firm. And so I'm so glad you hit on that point, Nathan. And law firms, obviously, they need to know this in an effort to take action. So we're grateful for you being willing to take time to share this important information. For those who are sitting here and their head may be spinning, they have lots of questions to follow up with, or maybe they're living in a moment of crisis right now. What's the best way for them to reach out to you or contact you, Nathan?
Yeah. Reach out to me directly at Nathan at at Miller, Miller-ink.com, or you can call our office general line at 310-571-8264. And we'll get back to you. We're happy to chat. And if you just have questions, you heard the podcast and you want to have a follow-up, we're always happy to be a resource for the legal community.
Nathan, thanks again for joining the show.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, Tanner. Great to be with you.
Lawsome by ConsultWebs with Tanner Jones. For show notes, links, and info, go to consultwebs.com/podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Watch for the next Lawsome episode to discover more breakthrough insights to build a thriving law firm.